Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. I am your host, God of Heroics, or you can just call me Hero. Today, I am just uploading one of my videos from a stream I did over on IRIAM. I went ahead and recorded this while running the stream, so if you want to catch any of my streams live, you can go ahead and find me on IRIAM, or just wait for me to go ahead and just upload the full stream here. It's always going to be about an hour to 2 hours, maybe a little bit more, depending on how much time I have. But anyway, enjoy. All right, so we are going to be talking about cursed objects now. Now that we've gone over pretty much the basis for all things cursed energy, we're going to get into the specifics. In order, we're going to talk about cursed objects, cursed tools, binding vows, barriers, domains, and then we're going to talk about cursed techniques. But the cursed technique discussion is going to be a little special. Damn, this section is a little bit longer than I thought it was. My bad, G. We're gonna try to rush through this one. Well, maybe not rush through it, but we're gonna go over what we have to go over, but in a decent amount of time, hopefully. So, items that contain cursed energy are categorized by Jujutsu sorcerers as their cursed tools, or they can also be called cursed corpses or cursed objects to make things a little bit simpler. They can go by three different names depending on the context. So, cursed objects, as the name suggests, are items that come from a dark past and contain cursed energy. They can be remains of ancient sources that have the unique ability to be incarnated via being consumed by a potential vessel. Cursed objects are ranked as such in the same way that sorcerers can be ranked, going from like the lowest grade all the way to the highest of special grades. And the tools that they collect are also ranked in such a manner. So, for example, cursed objects can be considered special grade, would be like the remaining fingers of Sukuna. So Sukuna's fingers, all 20 of them, are considered special grade cursed objects. Sorcerers often use special grade objects like these as amulets to ward off cursed spirits in certain locations. This is because weaker spirits will often fear the extreme power exuded by stronger special grade spirits. So, for example, Yuji's school, like right outside the school, had Sukuna's finger wrapped, sealed away, and it was sitting there so that anybody weaker than special grade, or most people that are weaker than special grade, like grade 2 and lower, wouldn't basically be coming to the school and wouldn't be attacking or doing anything like that. So Suguna is the only reported case that continues to attract curses, and that's off of the belief that anyone consuming his fingers will gain more power. So special grade cursed objects can't be destroyed because they're perceived by a binding vow that was used to make them cursed objects in the first place. This binding vow being that the ones that were sealed with these cursed objects effectively die and cannot harm others with the object, basically being the physical representation of their essence. So Sukuna and all the sorcerers incarnated during the Culling Games, which you will see later in this current season, originally needed Kinjaku's help to become cursed objects. With his thousands of years of knowledge, he likely knows how to loophole this ability to be able to give himself the altering binding vow. So, regardless of his method, Suguna was the one who learned how to perform this technique on his own, and after experiencing it firsthand. So, pretty much Sukuna's fingers, like we said, are cursed objects, and the stipulation behind them is that they cannot be destroyed because they're now being used as a way to ward off other spirits, and they can be used to make pretty much other sorcerers or spirits stronger depending on how they're used. And the objects basically are under vow to not harm other people. So Sukuna's finger would never be able to exude a certain amount of energy that could physically affect anybody. Like it would never be able to contaminate somebody or kill them based off of just being a cursed item, which is pretty much why it can't be destroyed, or why people, can collect them or want to collect them to keep them from being used by others. So, while cursed objects are typically for incarnating sorcerers or warding off curses, there's one we know that has an extra ability with its inanimate item. and that is the prison realm. The prison realm is a wait, what? So his fingers are a curse. Yes, his fingers are cursed. They are very special cursed objects. Where his Sukuna's 20 fingers in his lore was said to have been cut off, and a portion of his power was pretty much sealed into every single finger. And through what we learn later in the story, Sukuna basically did this to himself because, for the sake of the Culling Games, Kinjaku was turning other sorcerers that he considered to be the most powerful in their eras. He was turning them into cursed objects so that when they died, they would be able to be reincarnated into another sorcerer. And Sukuna pretty much figured out how to do this for himself, but in order to get it done, he sealed himself into his individual fingers. So now the fingers can't be destroyed, but they also can't be used to kill anybody. They can only be used for incarnation and warding off other enemies, or warding off other curses, like weaker, lesser curses. So the prison realm is a special grade curse object said to be said to be the remains of a powerful sorcerer named Genshin. This cursed object can produce a barrier powerful enough to seal anything and anyone, being used to seal, such a when it was being used to seal, what's his name's Gojo, during the early chapters of the Shibuya arc. It probably won't happen, but personally, I think it would be cool if Genshin could be like reincarnated into like the modern day. I finished the JJK manga, and I can tell you Genshin is not around, unfortunately. Um, I personally theorize that this Genshin person is the one who taught Tengen how to use barrier techniques. Tengen just recently got introduced in season 3, and pretty much Tengen keeps up all the barriers active in Japan currently, which is a crazy feat to do countrywide. But I believe that Genshin is the one that he may have learned this technique from, because we do know that he's been around forever. So, is it like during the school fight with Yuji versus Mahito to keep Gojo out? Similar, kind of. That's more relevant to the barrier stuff that we're going to talk about later. Because so basically, when you're placing a vow, when you're placing a barrier, you can place a binding vow on said barrier, and like you can basically use it to make stipulations. For example, when they were making the barriers in the Shibuya arc, they were like, hey, these, like, we're placing these specific items in these locations, and this would be the parameter of the barrier. However, we're gonna make it so that while the barrier is up, everyone but Gojo can go in. So the idea is that when creating a veil, um, or a barrier of any sort, you can kind of just cast it wherever, and you can kind of create stipulations here and there, but you can't do anything too crazy with it. But because the sorcerers placed specific totems in areas, it allowed them to pretty much create a stronger binding vow on that, which allowed them to basically say like, oh, Gojo can't come in, because now there's a higher risk that Gojo would be able to come in if those totems were destroyed, if that makes sense. So increasing the risk factor made the binding vow that they could place on the barriers that they made stronger. It's not necessarily like having a cursed object out. I think having a special grade cursed object around is actually more powerful in that sense, where it naturally wards off anybody that's weaker than, like, I think grade 1. And there are not a lot of curses or even sorcerers that are grade 1 and higher. There's a decent amount, but there's not a lot of them compared to like how many actually exist. So the only thing is that when you're placing a cursed object somewhere for the sake of warding off cursed spirits, you can't make an additional binding vow. And that's because the object already has a binding vow on it from its time of creation. That binding vow being that it can't be destroyed, but it also can't harm others. All right, but this character whose name known as Genshin that I was talking about, we never see him in the series, but we're told that he was basically the most powerful barrier user in all of Jujutsu Kaisen, and that before his death, he basically had himself sealed away as the prison realm, and the prison realm became the special grade curse object that came off of his existence. It's really unknown if consuming the prison realm, as uncomfortable as that would be, would reawaken Genshin, like if it would reincarnate him the way it did with, like, Sukuna eating Sukuna's fingers, what Yuji eating Sukuna's fingers. But yeah, so basically it has an innate ability based on Genshin specifically, and I want to say that's because Genshin might have applied that ability himself before his death, because it's kind of a loophole where, like I said, with cursed object, they can't be destroyed, but they also can't harm anybody. Sealing somebody in a barrier is not technically considered harming them, because inside of the prison realm, it's pretty much like a timeless void in a sense, where now that you're sealed in it, time doesn't really pass for you specifically, so you can't starve to death, or you can't die of dehydration or anything like that. So Gojo pretty much spends his whole time in there training in a sense, so he gets a lot stronger and a lot more powerful with his techniques, as you'll see when he finally is released in season 3. Wow, hold on real quick. I hate this. Like, I know I'd say this in pretty much every stream, but why do they decide to do the most loudest nonsense outside when I decide to record a stream? No matter what time of day it is. Last time I didn't even, like, I was streaming at like 2 o'clock or recording at like 2 o'clock, and they started cutting the grass and doing projects. I started this stream at 12, and now we're still doing stuff. Like the hyperbolic time chamber on evil steroids. Yes, that is correct, Glitchtrap. It is very much like the hyperbolic time chamber on steroids. The only difference between that and the hyperbolic time chamber, in my opinion, is one, well, you did say on steroids, so that does encompass this, but instead of being like, with the time chamber where it's like every week in the time chamber, sorry, every year in the time chamber is like a week in real life, it's actually like no time whatsoever. So you're pretty much just there with no concept of time for you, no concept of time for the outer world or anything like that. You don't have to eat, you don't have to drink water. In the time chamber, they still do have to like feed and fuel themselves, but you don't have to do that in the prison realm. Oh, 24 hours. Sorry, my bad. It is 24 hours. And then with the prison realm, you also can't leave by your own volition. You have to be released from someone on the outside. You can't just decide, oh, I'm just going to walk out of the prison realm. I'm done training. That's really not how that works. So the prison realm is the definition of purgatory. Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, that is essentially the best way to explain it. It's like purgatory, and you literally can't leave on your own volition. So let's continue this. The incarnation process is very simple. If a human who is basically if a human who okay, so I do have to explain this a little bit, the differences between non-sorcerers and sorcerers. So I don't know why they don't explain this well enough, but basically the real difference between being able to utilize curse energy and not is connected to a particular part of your brain. I kid you not, they never explain which part of the brain this is. They don't say if sorcerers have a part of their brain that normal people don't, or if they utilize a part of their brain differently, but basically there's a part of the brain that sorcerers have that enables them to be able to utilize curse energy. It's kind of like how different parts of your brain are made specifically for functioning in different ways, where like this part is connected to your emotions, this part is connected to your rational thought, this part is connected to your creativity, this is about your memory, and blah 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 blah, and like it's stuff like that. But this particular part of the brain is like, this helps manipulate cursed energy. It's like MHA, you have an extra joint in your pinky toe. Yeah. Yeah, it's like that. It's very much like that. So yeah, they have a part in their brain that allows them to utilize curse energy. So if somebody who has this functioning part of their brain were to ingest a cursed object, then the energy from the cursed object will take over their mind and body and use this body as a new vessel and it would suppress the consciousness of the host so that the consciousness of the person that the object was created from basically takes over. It's like Baby in Dragon Ball GT, where he goes inside of people's bodies and then he becomes the dominant personality and can utilize their body with all of their abilities and his abilities and stuff like that. Hi, Pinky. Thank you for being here while we discuss this extremely complicated power system known as cursed energy. So yeah, that's pretty much the best way I can explain it. It would be like Baby taking over someone's body, but the person has to be prepped for being a sorcerer. So the reason the Culling games exist is because I hate explaining this because it's so dumb. Like, it's dumb, but it's so convoluted. So Kenjaku wanted to eventually create the Culling games. I'm not going to explain his end goal for the Culling games in case you're anime only, but he wanted to create the Culling games where he brought back a bunch of sorcerers from history in their prime, and he also wanted to awaken new sorcerers in the modern day. And then he wanted to have them basically have a free-for-all tournament against each other. So the way he did this was by sealing past sorcerers away. He would convince them of his plan, let them know, like, this is what I'm going to do, and they would have to be on board. And he would seal them into being a cursed object. And now in the modern day, he was basically marking people for incarnations, like people that had the potential to be sorcerers but hadn't yet awakened to their own actual abilities, much like Megumi's sister. In the season 1, Megumi's sister was in a coma state, and it's because Kenjaku basically marked her for incarnation for another sorcerer who you'll see in the Culling games. But then the other thing he did was he awakened people to Jujutsu sorcery. So when he took over Geto's body, he got Geto's ability of, being able to swallow spirits and then being able to summon them and all that stuff. So when he used his maximum technique, which was Uzumaki, pretty much he takes every single cursed spirit that he has in his repertoire, and he does a powerful attack using every single one of them at once. The strength of this ability scales to how many cursed spirits he has in his, currently in his ability. But when he does that, he can no longer summon any of those spirits that he has, but he gains the ability of every single one of those spirits that he can use one time each. Thank you, Blitztrap, for the 200-point gifted. So remember, right before he used Maxim Uzumaki, he absorbed Mahito, because this was when he was running away from Yuji. So he absorbed Mahito, then while fighting the entire coalition, he used Maximum Technique Uzumaki. And so now he no longer has access to summon any of the cursed spirits that he or Geto have swallowed in their entire lifetime in this body. But he uses the Idol Transfiguration ability that he just got from Mahito, and he uses it to basically awaken a bunch of people to the idea of cursed energy. He alters their brains physically. Everybody in this area, I think it's Shinjuku, he alters their brains to being able to use cursed energy. So now he has awakened new sorcerers, and he also has people prepped for incarnation with other cursed objects that he has collected over the years. So that's where we're getting all of this from. And I'd say that to pretty much explain how incarnation works. I know it's really complicated and it's convoluted as shit, but I had to explain what Kenjaku was doing so that you can understand how incarnation works and why it works the way it works. All right. It's a lot, I'm sorry, but since we did that, we can actually skip a whole section. There's a whole section about converting people into cursed objects, and we can skip that whole section now because we pretty much went over that. So the thing with Itadori, Yuji was pretty much thought to be a vessel for Sukuna that Kenjaku himself had made, as we will see in season 3. Kenjaku did take over the body of Yuji's mom, and real quick, I don't think any plan is worth taking back shots for. as as a straight man, I don't think any plan is worth back shots. Is what I'm saying. Like, dude took over he took over Yuji's mom, got pregnant and had Yuji for his own personal plans, and I personally think that's kind of weird. Like, he could have prepped a different body in a different way, but he wanted to go ahead and use this vessel to kind of prep for Sukuna. And the reason he did this is because Sukuna is by far the most powerful cursed user in all of history. And as powerful as he is, it would be very difficult to reincarnate Sukuna in the modern day without it possibly killing the body that he's trying to incarnate him into. Because when you incarnate somebody, their body has to be able to utilize that person's abilities. So it says, I just realized, talk about mixing shit from Naruto. Yuji is Sukuna's vessel. They took that from Naruto and the Nine Tails. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that actually was inspired from Naruto itself. The whole demon sealed inside the protagonist kind of thing. So yeah, Yuji was pretty much created for the sake of being Sukuna's vessel. Yeah, so basically he's a vessel, but Yuji is less of a vessel and he's more so of a cage, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But he's considered a cage for Sukuna in a sense, where he can inhabit Sukuna within his body, but he stays within his own consciousness. Like, he can control and switch between him and Sukuna at will, up until in season 1, where Sukuna makes that deal with him after Yuji's death, where he's like, oh, I'll heal you with a reverse curse technique, keep you alive, but if I say in chain, we switch places automatically. So Sukuna can switch places with Yuji at will, but through that binding vow, because they did agree to it. It says a cage. You're proving my point for me. Yeah, I know. The cage thing, I know. I'm sorry, man. That's just how it is. I'm pretty sure it is inspired by Naruto. But yeah, Yuji and Sukuna pretty much have a binding vow now that Yuji unfortunately was forced to forget about. Where if Sukuna says in chain, he forcefully will switch positions with Yuji until he switches. I think he can switch with him for like a limited amount of time. I don't remember exactly how long, but it's a short amount of time. And the stipulation is that while Sukuna is, for Sukuna's side of this, is 1 minute. Thank you. He can switch bodies with Yuji for 1 minute. And Sukuna is not allowed to physically harm any of Yuji's friends. However, Yuji was forced to forget about the binding vow after they made it. So, I'm not gonna get into spoilers for why that's important, but that is the way Sukuna was able to trick the whole cage aspect, pretty much. So with all of that out of the way, it's time to pretty much close this talk about cursed objects and stuff. But we're gonna go over 3 details here. So Sukuna was talked about a lot throughout this time, and it's because his fingers are pretty much the most powerful version of like cursed objects known to man, and they're literally a huge plot point in the story. So we're gonna start our list talking about that. So Sukuna's 20 fingers are pretty much the most coveted object in the entire series, and they contain immense cursed energy to the point where he was actually the most feared sorcerer of the Heian era. And as we'll see later, there's not many characters that can really stack up to his abilities. Waffle Fries, thank you for joining the stream. You are a first timer. So I am the God of Heroics. We go over all things in lore, looking at different heroes, villains, going over plot points and stories and things like that. We also talk about power systems, which we are doing today. And we pretty much label characters as heroes or villains or what have you, pretty much gathering our own group of heroic disciples. And we are going over cursed energy. You missed the general overview of cursed energy, but I'm praying for your sake that you know more or less how it works, so that going forward you are not confused. So Sukuna was, like I said, the most feared cursed energy user of the Heian era. Originally he was a sorcerer, and after his alleged death he did end up becoming a cursed spirit, unfortunately. And as we know, Yuji ate one of his fingers when he was pretty much in dire need, leading to Sukuna's revival. Now, it's not stated specifically how strong each of his fingers are, but I would like to believe that each finger is about 5% because he did seal himself. I would assume evenly amongst all 20 of his fingers. And as we know, 5 times 20 would be 100. That would be 100% of his power. So he was able to easily one-shot the curse that Megami was fighting. And then when he had the 15 fingers, he was able to effortlessly destroy pretty much all of Shibuya while fighting the disaster curse, and then also fighting Maharaga. So the next general overview is going to be the prison realm. We are going to talk about that just a little bit because there is some info on that. So in the prison realm, God, I sound like a baby. In the prison realm, Jesus, which we did speak about briefly, this cursed object is called a taboo object because it can cast a barrier trapping anything or anyone in a pocket dimension contained within itself. It's activated when the user commands Kaimon, or open gate. In order to seal the target, you must keep the target within 4 meters of the cube for a full minute. If the target is sentient, then it has that whole minute to it has to perceive that whole minute. And Kenjaku sealed Gojo with this as a loophole because he's in the body of his best friend Sukuru Geto. He forced Gojo by seeing him to pretty much reminisce on all his time with Geto, which forced Gojo to perceive more than just a simple minute of time. So rather than having to stand there for a whole minute, he basically made Gojo himself perceive a minute in an instant, basically trapping him. And the final cursed object that we are going to discuss is actually a very unethical cursed object. And it's called a cursed womb death painting. And this is where we get characters like Chozo and his 2 brothers that are dead, whose names I don't remember. So I'm going to describe a plot that is so vile. Simply saying it out loud would probably get me demonetized if I was fully monetized on any platform. So back in the Meiji era, there was a woman who lived. She had a very odd genetic composition that allowed her to give mysterious births to babies that were both human and curses. This caused her family to slander her and likely make attempts on her life and her newborn children. She managed to escape her family and take refuge at a temple protected by Jujutsu sorcerers. Unfortunately, Kenjaku, who was going by the name Noritoshi Kamo at the time, he caught wind of this woman's story and decided to make her his toy for the sake of science by force. He basically knocked her up 9 times, each one of them being aborted. And since they were all technically curses, he kept them to be studied for their potential to be used for incarnations. And Kenjaku wiped all records of this woman from the history books. So yeah, that's pretty dark. He literally found out there's a woman who can give birth to human curse hybrids. She already dealt with a lot of trauma from her family, had to run from them, leaning on Jujutsu sorcerers for safety. Unfortunately, the worst of the Jujutsu sorcerers happened to be there, and he made her trauma that much more worse by taking full advantage of her for the sake of science and research, then made sure that nobody in the history of ever going forward would even know that this woman existed. That is some pretty shady work. So if we fast forward to season 1, the higher-ups at Tokyo Jujutsu High School have had all 9 of these cursed death womb paintings in their possession, sealed in their warehouse in a concealed barrier. So Hanami, when he was busy, getting the Beats by Dre put on him by 2 teenagers, the real fraud of JJK, Mahito, actually snuck into the warehouse after offing tons of guards and took 3 of the cursed death womb paintings because they contained special grade levels of cursed energy. And those 3 death womb paintings that he basically kidnapped and incarnated ended up being Eso, Kechizu, and Choso. I'm so glad I put those names in here because I promise you, I would not have been able to tell you any of those 3 but Choso. Yeah, what the F? Yeah, yeah, exactly, Glitchtrap. It's pretty vile. It's pretty crazy. But yeah, that fight in season one where Hanami was getting his ass whooped by Yuji and Toto, all of that was a distraction so that Mahito can go steal the Death Wound paintings from the warehouse. Eso and Kechizu are the two that Yuji and Nobara killed at the end of season one, and then Choso was the blood manipulator that is actually from the Kamo clan, and he's the one that does like the piercing blood technique. He's the one that Yuji fought in the bathroom where they had that fight inspired by the raid. So the first two received tickets. I wrote this crazy. Wow, what was my mindset when I wrote this? So I wrote the first two, Eso and Kechizu, received tickets from Itadori and Nobara to a Pop Smoke concert with Tupac as their opening act. And Cheso learned that Itadori is his half brother because Itadori is technically it says drunk or stoned, my guess. Crazy thing is I don't drink or smoke, so I was just built different back in these days. I don't even remember when I wrote this. This was like maybe 2-3 years ago. But yeah, so Itadori and Choso are half brothers because Choso is the son of the woman from the Meiji period and Kinjaku, who was Noritoshi Kamo at the time, and then Itadori is sons of Kinjaku, who was his mother. I forget her first name, but something Itadori, and well, you know, his dad, who is Jin Itadori. So they're half brothers. So Itadori basically unalived two of his siblings. But anyway, the other six cursed death wound paintings are still at the Jujutsu High School, and they also have names. And you know, that's pretty much everything on cursed energy. On cursed objects. Sorry, not cursed energy. We have a lot more to cover with cursed energy. But yeah, so that's pretty dark, pretty sad. Unfortunately, a lot of that is very chaotic. But yeah, we did learn a decent amount when it came to this aspect. When it comes to cursed objects, there were a decent amount of them, but the sake of cursed objects is pretty much for warding off curses or incarnating sorcerers, pretty much. That's pretty much all they're for. There are different types, obviously, like there is Sukuna's fingers, there's the cursed death wound paintings, and then the prison realm, but they all have their own individual functions, and that is pretty wild. It's a normal sibling rivalry. We don't question a sibling war. That is correct. We we don't ask questions when siblings start fighting. We just let them do their thing until they get it all out of their system. But yeah, with cursed objects out of the way, the next thing to talk about will be cursed tools.